work with marketing. Actually, let me pull that up now. And so on the intranet, recording has started. Awesome. So on the intranet, we have a bunch of tabs up here. This last tab, internal training library. This is managed by Shedlin and the marketing team. And there are already a few trainings there already. So Get There Faster, which I believe Salima conducted herself. And there are also additional links. And so these are where our training links are going to be. So that way that it's not a bunch of windows you're having to scroll through. It's just a link that you can quickly click on. So there are a few trainings that are already there. There's a GeoSol training that I want to say my supervisor, Chad Kunerth, did. There's Ticket to Work training. Get There Faster is, I believe, a duplication. There's MSG training I did last year for the DEO CAP response. There's a monitoring overview. That one's pretty long. I want to say that's an hour and a half, almost 2 hours. That one I did earlier this year. It really goes over the basics of monitoring, not a little bit internally and also at the state level. Goes over the monitoring tools, how they're used, a little bit of the DEO audit process and what's required of us. And then incoming calculations training. I believe I'm trying to work with Salima to get low income training with you all scheduled for tomorrow. And so that will take a lot of the same information from here, but it will be a live and fresh training for you all. And I'll actually probably use that training tomorrow to replace the one that's on here, just so it's a little bit more updated. But this is where the training will be saved and recorded. So like I say, if you want to go back and view it, that's where you'll find that. But in terms of getting to the meat and potatoes of today's training, like I say, we're going over WIOA eligibility. WIOA eligibility is a very dense, very detailed topic. So there's a couple of resources I'm going to go through. But the first one I want to go through is starting off simple. And so I want to start here on the share drive under the career services folder. There's a folder called CSTB forms retention. And I myself, I do a lot of different things at the organization. I'm over, like I said, I'm over the QA and monitor team. And I'm also over forms. And so any of the forms, most of the forms that you guys see are forms that I've probably created or I've had to go in and edit or change. And so if you guys are working on forms, I'm already talking with Salima about the career plan. But if you guys are using a form and you think that there are things that could be improved on it, think that it's not very useful for you, you think there's something missing, even there's a typo, because I'll admit I'm not perfect and I don't always catch things. But if you see something on the form and you have a recommendation for an edit, I would definitely recommend that you discuss that with Salima first, have a conversation with her, and then she can kind of get notes, get some comments together and get that to me, and then I can turn around and make those edits to the form. Most of the forms in here are either a PDF or a PDF fillable, and so it's a form that you can either just print out the PDF and then write on that, or you can take the actual fillable form and then complete that electronically. Excuse me. And so here you have the full inventory really of almost all the forms in the organization, save for HR and finance forms are really the only ones that I don't manage. You have the different programs here. You have WIOA specifically. You have a bunch of kind of general forms, so grievance. The Employer Florida Service Guide is in there. That's not really a form, but that's still a resource that we want to make sure everybody has access to. You have the poverty guideline sheet, tobacco-free Florida referral, manual job seeker registration. So unfortunately, earlier in the program year when Employer Florida went down and we had no way to register customers, I went and created a form that mimicked that front end registration process that the customer has to go ahead and fill out. And so if ever we're in that situation again, or you guys are out in the field and somebody isn't registered in Employer Florida, and you don't have a laptop or you don't have internet connection, I would recommend bringing a couple of those forms with you, so that way you can collect that information from the job seeker. It does have an acknowledgement specifically that they do have to acknowledge to at the bottom, saying yes, I give permission to CareerSource staff to use this information to create an account for me. So if you use that form, make sure that they sign off on that. And then the Pearl form for the EF staff registration is also in there as well. But the form I'm specifically wanted to talk about is here in the WIOA folder. and it is this form here, WIOA ADDW Youth Eligibility Criteria. So I already have that opened up. So like I say, I want to start off simple. This is a form I created to help make WIOA eligibility digestible. Like I say, very kind of simple and easy to read. And so the first section here goes over youth. So you have out of school youth and in school youth. And so those are the two youth populations that we deal with in the eligibility groups that we have. And so out of school sounds very simple. Oh, it's just youth who are out of school. And in school, oh, youth who's in school. I will say first, one thing to definitely clarify, we had the state come down and do some training a couple of years ago. And a specific question we asked them was, what is the difference? What counts as in school and out of school? And I will say, to highlight one specific example, if you have a youth who is in high school, so I'll use my alma mater, Robinson, as an example. So I was in Robinson. I graduate if I was in my senior year and I'm getting ready to graduate. If I have plans to go to USF, UCF, UF, HCC, Stanford, Princeton, Harvard, Everest, if I have plans to go to school in the fall and I've applied, I've been accepted, and I'm already planning my classes, even in the summer when I'm not in school, I'm considered an in-school youth because I have plans to go into school. I'm actually registered to be going into school. However, if I'm a senior and I'm trying to figure things out, frankly, as I was trying to figure things out. I had some personal issues going on with my family and I wasn't able to go to college immediately. In that summer, I would have been considered an out-of-school youth. And actually I was, and I started out as a WIOA youth participant myself. And that's actually how I started working here a couple of years ago, several years ago. Um, and so that's a distinction that I definitely want to make because that's not really clear in policy and procedure. And so that's why I say that was a question we actually had to ask the state when they physically came down to do different trainings on WIOA and other programs of what counts as in school and out of school. Where does that kind of fall? And so definitely be mindful as if you're dealing with youth of, okay, what are your plans? Are you enrolled? Are you obviously are attending, or what's your status? Are you just looking to go to school? Do you not have any plans? And I would say if they don't have any plans and they're not enrolled, that makes it a little bit easier to enroll them as out of school youth. But going over the different criterias, so out of school youth is specifically 16 to 24 years old. In school is 14 to 21. Now, typically at Career Source, we don't handle 14 or 15-year-olds. We usually start with 16, but depending on the circumstances, special exceptions can be made. The 14 to 21 is really federal guidance that we have, but like I say, locally, we really don't deal with the 14 to 15-year-olds. So going over out of school youth first. So applicant must meet one of the primary eligibility criteria or have a secondary barrier and meet low income. So basically what that means is you have the primary eligibility here. And so if they meet one of these, we're good. We're good to go. We don't have to really look at anything else. And so like I said, I want to make this simple on you guys because I know eligibility can be overwhelming. And I don't want you guys to be overwhelmed and think you have to check every box, collect all the data and material and the paperwork, because I know for you guys on the front end, but also for our MIS data entry department, on the back end doing the data entry, I'm sure both of you can agree that a 45-page application packet is much better and more manageable than a 90-page or 100-page packet because I'm sure Elizabeth has spent time doing MIS herself, being an MIS tech previously, but also being a monitor. I'm sure she's seen 90-page packets. I've seen them. And it's even on the back end, it's hard to go through. But like I say, for you guys doing the case management, it's a lot for you guys to put together and then have to try to manage and make sure you have everything. And so don't try to check off all the boxes because that's not required. It's not required in local policy. It's not required in federal policy. Like I say, the guidance is if they meet the primary, so you have somebody who's not attending school and not younger than 16 or older than 24, and one or more of the following. So if you have someone who's a high school dropout, immediately good to go. If you have someone who's offender, and that's juvenile or adult justice system, they're good to go. You don't need to say, oh, a high school and an offender and low income. No, offender, good to go. If they're homeless or a runaway, if they're an individual who is pregnant or parenting, if they're a youth in or aged out of foster care, and then additionally, if they're disabled. So those are your primary eligibility. So you only have to hit one of those, and that youth can be considered eligible. But like I said, you have to hit these 3 bullet points, or these 2 bullet points, excuse me. They're not attending school, and they're not younger than 16 or older than 24. And so the youth department itself goes from 16, or really 14, including the ISY guidance, 14 to 24. 24 is the kind of the max. At that point, afterwards, they would be referred to the WIOA adult program, and then they would fall under that eligibility criteria, which I'll go over next. Now, if you have trouble with that, then you can meeting one of the primary. So when I came into WIOA, I didn't meet any of these. I was not a high school dropout. I got my diploma. I was also in the IB program, so I had a bunch of credits that I could use. I'm not an offender. I was not homeless or a runaway. I was not pregnant or parenting. I was never in foster care, and I'm not disabled myself. And so for me, I had to fall under secondary eligibility criteria. And so as you can see here, these are low income and then have additional um, barriers to them as well. And so these are low income and requires additional assistance. There's an asterisk next to that because there's the full list I'll go over at the bottom of this form of the full additional assistance criteria and the local um, barriers that we've kind of set up. There's low income and basic skills deficient. So if you have somebody who's doing, we used to use TABE, but now we use the Wonderlic. But if you're using one of those assessments to determine their skill level, and they're below like a ninth grade level, if you have somebody who's 17 years old, but they take the test and their reading and math and their comprehension skills are at like a sixth grade level, that would be basic skills deficient because they should be in a grade of about 10 or 11th grade, but their skills are not at that level, unfortunately. And so that is a criteria that's eligibility criteria that is a barrier for them that we can use to make them eligible in combination with low income. And then you have low income and English language learner. I will try to clarify that because I know some people have got confused with that. An English language learner is somebody who is learning who speaks another language and is learning the English language. And so they're in like ESOL classes. They speak Spanish, they speak Farsi, they speak French, they speak another language, and English is a second language to them. Over here, it defines the low income criteria specifically. So you have a person who receives or is a member of a family that receive cash welfare TANF benefits. You have receives or is a member of a family that receives food stamps or has in the past months received prior to the application date. So if my application date is today, October 5th, as long as it's in the past 6 months, even if today I'm not getting food stamps or no one in my family or my household is getting food stamps, if in the past 6 months, so in July, I was getting food stamps or somebody in my family was, I could be considered eligible. That could be included as low income. Receives or is a member of a family that receives SSI, supplemental security income, whose total gross family income during the past 6 months times 2 falls within 70% of the lower living standard income level. So we usually call that listal income guidelines. I'm not going to go too in depth into that today. I'm just going to go high level over that. Like I say, tomorrow we'll really get into that. But those guidelines are federal guidelines and they change every year and they're issued out. And so as long as so basically, like I said, I'm not going to try to go too much into it, but you just pull their income for the past 6 months, times that by 2 to come at an annualized number. So we're not going to pull the whole last 12 months. We're going to pull just the last 6, times that by 2, and then come up with a number, and then compare that to the chart, depending on their family size and income level. And so that's another way that you can determine low income is really directly using the income. You have family of one. And so if a person is disabled, so they specifically say they're disabled, and their over income is really the only time you would necessarily use this. Then that person, because they're disabled based on federal guidance, we're able to consider that person as a family of one and just look at their income solely. And so even if that person has zero income, that makes it even better, especially if the household is over. We can look at that disabled applicant as a family of one and just determine their income by themselves. And then the last low income criteria that you can use is living in a high poverty area based on a census tract data. It's one of the procedures I'm going to go over with you guys talks about that in a little bit more detail. But basically, there are different pockets within Hillsborough County that are considered low income areas. And so that itself can be used as justification for low income. And so again, these are individual low incomes. It's not when I say low income, they don't have to hit all of these. Obviously, I would be very, very, very surprised if you have somebody who's going to hit all six of these. But if you have somebody who hits all six of these, I'm glad that they came to us and I'm glad that they're seeking our assistance, because it's going to be very, very easy to make them eligible and definitely look at what type of program and assistance that we can give them to help them. But again, you only have to hit one of these. So when it's low income and requires additional assistance, it's if they have TANF, then you're good to go. For me, I was at that time, I was actually getting food stamps. And so that's how I came in. So that's why I say I didn't meet the primaries, but I met secondary of low income. It wasn't basic skills and it wasn't English deficient. I actually fell under the additional assistance. But for me, my low income was food stamps. And so I had food stamps. They checked off one of the additional assistance requirements, and I was able to be eligible for WIOA youth and enrolled into the program. Now moving into ISY or in-school youth. So like I said, this is a little bit different. Firstly, because of the age range. This only goes up to 21. It does include, like I say, it does federally include 14 and 15, but locally we typically don't. And so just kind of going over this quickly, applicant must not be younger than 14 or older than 21 at the time of enrollment and meet one of the primary criteria and meet one of the low income criteria. Now, another note I do want to say just in general for WIOA, the the eligibility at the time of application is very important because it becomes a screenshot. And so even if, and I'll actually continue to use myself as an example. Like I said, I came into WIOA Youth. They actually referred me into the internship here with Career Source Tampa Bay. Because I was in that internship and I was making a certain amount of money, I was no longer eligible to get my food stamps. And so technically, I lost my low income eligibility, but it didn't matter. I was still able to participate in WIOA Youth because at the time of my application, I was receiving food stamps. At the time of my application, I was deemed eligible, and that's the screenshot. So when that goes into Employ Florida and that's enrolled, your eligibility doesn't change. It's very cemented. And so the only time you're gonna get new eligibility is if you reapply and come back into the program. And so here the primary eligibility. And so like I say, there's a difference. With out of school, it's primary or secondary. With the ISY, it's primary and you must meet low income eligibility. And so here you have it, except for high school dropout, obviously because the youth has to be in school. They're basically the same. It also includes the secondary eligibility as some of the primary eligibility. And so your primary eligibility for in-school youth here is an offender, homeless or runaway, pregnant or parenting, in or aged out of foster care, disabled, English language learner, basic skills deficient, and then low income and additional skills require additional assistance required. And then the low income criteria is very much the same. You have TANF, food stamps, SSI, total family gross income, family of one, high poverty area, and then you have an additional one for those who are in school, free or reduced lunch. Obviously, you can only get free or reduced lunch if you're in school, and that only applies to high school and secondary schools. I've not ever seen free or reduced lunch programs through like a college or university. I don't know if they offer them, but if they do, unfortunately, that would not count for the low income criteria specifically. If any of you are familiar with the summer youth program that used to be called Summer Job Connection, is now called Tampa Bay Summer Hires. That's one of the main criteria that they use because it's very, very easy to just get the free lunch records and get youth enrolled into the program. But free reduced lunch is an additional one that's specific to in-school youth, obviously. And so I'm going to skip past ADDW just to show you the additional assistance kind of form that's on here as well. This form is included in the whole packet just for reference, but this form is in the forms retention folder on its own. And I'll say if you have a youth who you're using additional, you're specifically enrolling them and making them eligible with additional assistance required, this form should definitely be in the packet so that way we note what is that additional assistance. This is not going to be entered in Employed Florida under really a specific section. However, it does need to be included in the case note. And for purposes of monitoring and compliance, it does need to be in the case file and the application file. And so here, I'm not, like I say, I'm not going to read these directly and necessarily go through all of them, but you do have secondary, a couple of sections under secondary school, a couple of eligibility criteria for educational. So you can see GPA below a 3.0, parents or siblings dropped out of school. You have work readiness. So if they're needing, and I believe this one was mine, if I'm not mistaken, needs assistance completing a resume, lacks interviewing skills, unaware of local job market, and lacks preparedness to seek employment. That is definitely where I was. I had a resume. It was pretty decent. But I learned a lot, frankly, from even the EST classes when I started as an intern that I attended. I completely redid my resume. I think it looks a lot more professional now, and then only has gotten better as I've added more skills to it. But you can see it doesn't have to, it's not very in depth or very it's not a very harsh criteria that they have to meet if they're needing additional assistance. It's very simple. And 9 times out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, you're going to have a youth who's going to, if they don't meet one of these primary, secondary, and low income, or they don't meet the primary and secondary, but they meet low income and you're needing something additional, you should definitely be able to find a criteria under here: employment challenges, family issues, living arrangements, substance and mental health. So this is our local list, but you should definitely be able to find a criteria for a youth and be able to eligibilize them under the additional assistance. And so that's youth. Now I'm going to go into AD and DW. And so, like I say, you have adult, which youth covers in full range 14 to 24. However, if you have a youth who comes in at 18, 20, 21, depending on what they're looking to do, we can also consider them an adult as long as they're 18 and above. So adult is not specifically 24 and after. It's really 18 and up. And so, like I say, this does have a little bit of different criteria. And then there are two categories based on the kind of adult funding. So there's adult, and then there's adult dislocated worker. Going over adult first, applicants must be age 18 and up. So there's no cap, obviously. So if you have somebody who's 78 years old and wants to come into WIOA, welcome. We're glad to have you and we're glad to help you. Applicants must be 18 and up and authorized to work in the US and meet low income criteria. And so authorized to work in the US, I'm sure you guys are probably familiar with like I-9 documentation and verify authorized to work through that. As long as they have something that they can use, like a passport, a driver's license, and social, or if they're an alien or a refugee, but they have an authorization to work card, then that would be fine. Here, defining low income, and so you have an individual who receives food stamps again, or has received in the past 6 months, an individual whose total family income, excuse me, falls within the LISL guidelines, an individual who is homeless, an individual who has a disability, and whose family income does not meet income eligibility criteria, but they're individual. So again, disabled family of one, and then an individual on public assistance who receives federal, state, or local government cash payments, be receiving TANF or receiving SSI. So adult is very simple. It's very basic. It's very straightforward. Is 18 and up. Are you authorized to work in the US? And do you meet low income? And so low income is really the only, I mean, obviously you'll need to verify, make sure they're authorized to work in the US. You should definitely verify their age, but the low income criteria is where you're going to really have to look and investigate the most. Yes, Ms. Ross, I see you're typing, so I'll go ahead and wait for your question. Does the adult need to meet all of them or just one? Just one. So just like with the youth, they just need to meet one. They don't need to be food stamps and LISL and homeless and disabled, because again, that would be very difficult and we'd have a hard time serving people. It is definitely, it's just if they have food stamps, good to go. If they're 18 authorized to work in the US and they have food stamps, good. If they're 18 authorized to work in the US and disabled, and then you're looking at income, good. If they're homeless, good. You only have to use one. You don't have to use all of them.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Hey, quick question, Wesley.
Yes, sir.
Just to verify, we're discussing the low income tomorrow.
Yes, we're going to go in depth on that. And so I'm going to be going over Lissel itself. I'm going to be going over a little bit where that gets pulled from. And then I'm also going to be going over the income calculation sheet that's available to you guys. And so that if you have to use actual income and break it down and pull their income from the past 6 months and you have to get paychecks and pay stubs, how there's an easy way to put that in a form, it'll automatically calculate that and summarize it for you.
I got you. And then just before we do tackle income, because it's probably gonna we're probably gonna go off on a tangent tomorrow. When you see this two time or times two within 70% of the lower living standard, which is a LISL,
Hmm.
when that you see that within 70%, where is that line for you?
So
Is
that
it below
line,
it or past it?
so that,
70% of the LISL. Like the way I read it is you take that 13,590 and you get 70% of it, and you add 70% to it, and that's within 70%.
so
Based on
actually,
how that sentence is given as how I
yeah, it's unfortunately and that's one of the things of why we're doing a training on it because I that all of this language is pulled directly from federal policy. And so this wording is how it is in federal guidance.
okay,
Um, the guidance as it how the income is actually determined. So that this is the current Lissel levels actually, and this form is also available on the SharePoint. So
correct.
with these, and I know we're going to go into tomorrow, but I do want to answer your question. So you have the family size over here, and you have the annual income levels here. And
Right.
so say my income for the past 6 months has been $600 past 6 months, however that came to be, whether it was I only worked a week, however, whether it was I worked every week over the 6 months, whatever it was, my income for the past 6 months has been $600. So you'll take that
Right.
600 times that by two, that gives you 1,200. Now, if my family size, well, being realistic, my family size is one, it's just myself and my home. You would look at this number here, you're not doing anything to manipulate these numbers at all. These numbers are set in stone. You're looking at this number saying family size one, $1,200 is less than this. So then I would be eligible. If my income was $14,000, family size one, I would not be eligible.
Correct.
And
Only
so this,
reason that hit me right there is
hmm
with that last slide where it says the within.
hmm
Like I said, with the whole 70% thing, after I
right.
did that math, it lines up directly with the food stamp stuff for low income. And this is the
hmm
poverty level. That's why I was asking. But we can dive more into it tomorrow because I understand that part. But
Yeah, that's what I say. And the 70% as well kind of throws you off. So that's not math. You're really doing the math is already included. That's just I wish they didn't phrase it that way, but I understand why they phrase it that way because they are being specific on how the numbers are produced. But again, these numbers you're really not having to manipulate. But I hope
but
that
that
at
is the
least
LISL. The 13,590 is the LISL. It's not
yes,
70% or
well,
anything. That's directly it.
correct. And the first two we actually were allowed to pull from a different poverty guideline, a different federal guideline, and income level. And so that's why these have asterisks next to them because they're actually pulled from somewhere else. But these, the for 3 through 8, those are the actual 70% of Lissel. But that's why I say it can get overwhelming. So I hope I addressed your question and answered it a little bit, but we'll definitely get into more of that tomorrow.
Yeah, because that with the 70% stuff like that, that number isn't correct if it is 70, because that of the
Right.
LISL, the 70%, all that stuff is actually not even 70%.
Right.
Even if you
Yeah.
took it down, that number should be lower if we're doing 70%. And if we're doing within 70%, it should be higher. So, like I said, we can go into this tomorrow because it's going to be a whole tangent. So it's all
Yeah,
good.
no, it definitely, and it took me. I had to do a lot of research, and I had to sit down with my supervisor at the time, Jody Toner, who was policy and procedure and performance guru, and so I had to sit down with her for about half an hour to an hour of really understanding what 70% of Lissel is, what's the first and second family level. So, like I said, we'll definitely I'll make sure to make a note,
For sure.
to kind of spend some extra time on that tomorrow.
For sure.
But yeah, like I said, we'll definitely get into the as I like to say, the meat and potatoes and the sides and the desserts of income tomorrow.
Right. Right. Make sure
So,
my fork has an extra prong too. I need a 5 orc or whatever you call
oh yeah, no,
it.
I'll make sure to have a to go box ready for
uh,
you. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Gosh.
Before I move on to dislocated worker, does anybody else have any questions that I want to address? I will take that as a no. So we owe a dislocated worker. Again, dislocated is age range is really the same, 18 and older. And so here applicants must be 18 and up and authorized to work in the US and meet low income criteria. So basically, right there, already the same as adult. What makes dislocated worker different is this is targeted for workers who are unemployed and have lost a job through no fault of their own, sometimes through mass layoffs, as we unfortunately saw a lot through COVID. And that happened during the business cycle. I'll say I expect an increase in the dislocated worker um, amount of customers and applicants that we have because of the hurricane. We see it almost every year that there are dislocated workers from areas that are hit very hard. You have people who have fisheries, who do farm work. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen the videos and pictures of whole neighborhoods and lands that are flooded and destroyed, and trees are ripped up and destroyed and sent miles away. And so I definitely expect we're going to have a lot of dislocated workers, if not specifically dislocated worker grants that come through. So definitely, I definitely encourage you to keep your eye out for a Hurricane Ian dislocated worker grant because I'm sure it's coming. I'm sure. And so here, kind of, like I said, the low income eligibility is the exact same. And so really nothing changes. Here it just defines further, specifically the dislocated worker categories. Again, since it is so detailed, I'm not going to read through all of this necessarily. But you can see here terminated and layoff and received notification of termination, is eligible for or has exhausted unemployment compensation, is unlikely to return to the previous occupation. You have additional things here. So somebody who's been terminated from employment as a result of permanent closure or a substantial layoff at a plant, facility, or enterprise. Someone's given announcement that the employer facility will close within 180 days. Um, yeah, previously self-employed, including farmers, ranchers, and fishermen. So like I said, we see a lot of those, especially after hurricanes. You have displaced homemakers, so somebody who's providing services to the home. Um, and there's different criteria that falls under that because that can be they're trying to get back into the work, especially under military, if they have a military spouse um, and who's either died or is just out in combat. You have some in the specifically military assignment. So that can be a spouse or a person of the military. So somebody who's coming out of the military and trying to get to the civilian workforce for the first time. And so all of those are specifically your dislocated worker criteria. Again, if you want to read through these, like I said, I don't want to bore you and spend so much time reading through them directly. But this form is available for you guys to look up and reference on your own. And additionally, there are a lot of resources that you guys can go through and look at. Miss Ross, is your hand
Yes, my
still
hand
up
is
or?
up.
Okay.
Yes, it's still. I do have one question. So
Yes.
I noticed on the military, for the military information where it says deployment, can you provide a little bit more clarity on what you all, or what does the state mean by deployment? Because from a military member, a deployment means we're going over, like you're going overseas
Mhm.
and combat operations. So
That's
that,
that's that's how we look at it. I'll say I don't think it's included in any of these materials, but there is a specific definition for um, like veteran that we use. And so it's served. I can't remember it off the top of my head, and I would have to pull
mm,
that, and I'll make a note to pull that as well.
okay.
But the deployment, yes, that is going overseas, actually deployed overseas. Did that answer your question? Did I address that properly?
Yes, and it's another question, but I'll address it with Rhonda and go from there.
Okay.
Thank you, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like I said, I wanted to start off simple. I created this form a couple of years ago to really simplify. We didn't have anything that was just like a centralized document that you could print out and put up at your desk or save on your desktop as something to say, okay, this is a criteria, just something quick to look at, quick to reference. Everything else was a full policy or a full procedure. And so I'm going to show you guys those if you want to look into those because I'm a detailed person. I love to read and get more information. So if you want those resources and references, you'll know where to find them. But also, if you just want something quick to have, you have this form as well. And so I do want to show you guys the DEO website. So the DEO website is floridajobs.org. I go here to mainly look at policy, procedure, guidance from the state, as well as monitoring tools. And so
their counterpart is overseas on deployment. So
you have workforce deployment.
double.
Go ahead and
Intern member could be making more money, but the
sorry.
household can make
Yeah, workforce development.
job
And then here you can find the monitoring tools as well as policy and guidance.
I'm saying that's just one stipulation. Who knows what else it could be, but yeah.
You have administrative policies, and then as well as you have TEGLs. And so the administrative policies and communiques are from the state themselves. And the training and employment guidance letters, also called TEGLs, usually referred to as TEGLs, are the federal guidance that you'll see. And so the federal guidance, especially on WIOA eligibility, that one's 1916. When you go to the TEGL list, it's a very, very long list and it can get overwhelming. So I definitely recommend doing Control F and searching for like keywords if you're looking for something. Because as you can see, this is a long list and they save them all. So they're dated, they're given an initial number and then the last number is what year they were released typically. And so these go all the way back. And so this is, like I say, a very extensive list, but if you're looking specifically for WIOA eligibility, this is a 49-page document. And so I don't necessarily advise printing it out. If you do print it out, probably print one out and share it amongst yourselves just to save paper. But again, here it's a very detailed, but realistically, these are summarized in either local policy or really that form. And so again, this is where I pulled a lot of that language directly from of some of that guidance and what's required. Additionally, I want to move into showing you guys some of the approved policies and procedures are for your own reference. And so again, on career services, there's the 21, 22 policies and procedures. I know we are in program year 22, 23 now. However, our VP of policy and programs, I believe is her title. She's currently working on a project to change the process of policies and procedures to make it a little bit more meaningful and targeted for programs and staff and make it easier for you guys to use. And so the name of the folder unfortunately has not been updated, but I know that she's working on that and we'll release that when she's ready and done. But in approved procedures are the couple of procedures I'm actually going to address now. Firstly, I'm going to quickly go over the WIOA eligibility procedure, and then I'm going to try to finish up our time today going over justification and suitability. Luckily, that one's very short and really very easy to go through. But I did want to touch on the eligibility procedure itself that kind of summarizes, I shouldn't say summarizes, it goes through in detail, really, the different ways that we can eligibilize people. So this is WIOA generally, so it goes over, here you can see WIOA general eligibility. So Hillsborough County resident, because we are a local workforce board of Hillsborough County, we're only able to serve Hillsborough County residents. So if somebody comes to you and say, oh, I live in St. Pete, well, that's great. You live in St. Pete. It's very nice and wonderful over there. And we also have a partner organization called Career Source Pinellas, and they would be more than happy to help you. They offer basically the same services as we do. It is up to each local board. They'll sometimes have specialized programs, additional special programs, but at the very basic, they have WIO. They have adult dislocated worker. They also have youth. We used to be very tied and co-branded with them, but that ended a couple of years ago. So now we are separate regions or workforce boards, as they call them. And so if you have somebody who does live in Pinellas, we wouldn't be able to serve them under ourselves. We would have to refer them to Pinellas. And so Hillsborough County resident, be authorized to work in the United States. And if they're a male, they are required to register with the Selective Service. And so you can verify that directly on the Selective Service system website, sss.gov. And you just have to enter the registration, the information to verify. If they are over the age of 26, they have to attest as to why. I'd say most of the time males are going to be registered. I know on a lot of um, college application loans, you have to it'll kind of not sneak it in there, but it's a component of it that will register you for selective service. And on FAFSA, it registers you for it. And so sometimes if for whatever, when you do your voter registration as well, I believe that that'll register them. So sometimes they're registered and they don't even know. But it is a requirement that they are registered. And so if they are not registered and they're over the age of 26, they're going to have a test to that. That doesn't have to be necessarily a long or detailed reason. I've seen things as necessarily simple as, I wasn't aware, I didn't know. A lot of times that happens with people who are foreigners and who move to the country. Obviously, that's unfortunately not something that they're made aware of a lot of the times. And so that's definitely a substantial reason as to them not being registered. But they will need to, if they're not for unfortunately any reason, they would need to attest and say, I'm not registered for XYZ reason. And they can just write a quick self-attestation for that. If they're a female or a female identifying, that doesn't apply to them. They wouldn't need to do the selective service. And there is a birthday, it's not in here, and I don't remember off the top of my head. I want to say it's December 1st, 1969. But there's a certain like year, if they're older than that date, they also don't need to be registered in selective service. But I know that I believe that's printed on the WIOA application itself, that date. But again, just that's usually not something that we come into too often that blocks or prevents people from participating in WIOA services. Going through here, it goes through the adult eligibility. So again, low-income individuals, participants on public assistance, individuals basic skills deficient, and they go in and defines these things a little bit further than my quick reference sheet did. Also give some references as to how you can pull these things. So for food stamps, you can verify SNAP by pulling the Florida screens. And as long as it has on there in the category FS, and then we can verify and see payment date, and see if it's in the last 6 months, we're good to go. They have food stamps and they're eligible. You have here individuals homeless, and it goes on to kind of define that, and also some documentation you can use to verify that. Individual who has a disability status can be verified with the following. And then individual who receives income, again, going over the list of income that we'll get into and really dive into tomorrow. You have public assistance, so that being cash, welfare, TANF for SNAP benefit. You have an individual getting public assistance, again, that can be verified using the Florida screen. So like I said, food stamps will show up, but also if they're getting cash assistance, TANF, that'll show up in the category as well, and we can look at that funding. And then you have receiving SSI income that would be verified through public assistance printouts. We can get the public assistance check, public assistance check if we get a copy of that from them. Again, Florida screens if that shows up on the Florida screens. So like I said, this goes into more detail and depth. And so if you're wanting a little bit more assistance on where to pull the information from, that's available for you here. Or more kind of information on the definitions of those, you can obviously, again, reference those here in the procedure. It goes into dislocated worker eligibility. And so this goes through, has those same dislocated worker. This is pulled exactly from, it's kind of hard to shorten this up, but there actually is a longer way to explain this that I'm going to show you guys in a minute. You have documentation of dislocated worker status as well. And so if you have a layoff letter, you can use a WARN notice. You can use the letter from the organization as well. If hopefully they've received a letter that's saying, hey, you're going to be laid, or it is unfortunate, but if they should receive a letter notifying them that they're going to be laid off, with a date and a time and information like that. And so if they have that letter, they're able to provide that for us. We can make a copy and include that. Moving on here, I'm actually just going to kind of skip down. You have self-sufficiency definition, but that applies to registered apprenticeships only. So definitely look out for this if you all are dealing with apprenticeships. The self-sufficiency threshold is 58,000 for employed adults. And again, that only applies for the registered apprenticeships. Then it jumps into youth eligibility, kind of relates to the same thing that we've gone over. So school status, they're in school or out of school. You have your primary barriers for the youth eligibility. So this, again, this doesn't really, one of the reasons, again, I created that form is to really separate them out. This just kind of combines them. So here you have all of the primary primary barriers together, and it really doesn't differentiate what applies to which applies to out of school and which applies to in school. You have here additional low income qualifications for youth. And so, like I said, here it talks about the high poverty area, definitely. And here's a link to the website to be able to use that. And then here's what kind of the map is going to look like. I will say it is up to the program managers how they're wanting you guys to structure the application packets. However, as a good practice, I and myself, I myself being on both in monitoring and having been in the data entry, direct data entry MIS department, it's much easier for us. If you have somebody who doesn't fall in a high income area, a high poverty area, you don't need to include the poverty map, because it's you're basically including something to say we're not using this to make this person eligible. Well, if you're not using it to make the person eligible, why is it in the application packet? So it does add more paperwork. And so, like I say, make things simple for yourself. Don't overwhelm yourself with trying to pull things that you don't need. If the person doesn't fall within in the low or high income or high poverty area, excuse me, um, I would say definitely from a monitoring standpoint, from an MIS, from compliance, it is not required in the packet. We would prefer it to not be in the packet. And so you're definitely more than welcome to share that feedback with your supervisors and say, from the monitoring standpoint, they don't want it in the packet, and they can speak to me if they have any questions. But definitely from our standpoint, it's not required, and we prefer if it's not in there because it does kind of get confusing because we look at it and we're like, oh, are they? No, they're not in high poverty, but it's in the packet. So it is a little confusing. So if they're not in a high poverty area, again, that's for youth. But if they're not in a high poverty area, you can go ahead and eliminate that from the packet. And then in here, it goes through and defines those additional areas of assistance for the youth, just like it was on the form. Details those out here. And then that's the end of it. It has a few references. So again, Teagle 1916. There's another Teagle here as well. There's a few other references if you want to reference that as well. A lot of these policies and procedures, unfortunately, like I said, they're a little outdated and currently being revised and changed. And so some of the titles here that, any questions should be directed to. Unfortunately, Jody Toner was our Chief Policy and Performance Officer. She's no longer with the organization, and leadership decided to eliminate that title. And so now there's only a VP of Policy and Programs. And so she would be the one that you would direct your questions to. However, myself, as I'm over the monitoring team, you can definitely feel free to email me. And shoot me an email and ask any questions, or if you want to ask Salima, direct those to her first, you definitely can. But if you have any questions or trying to clarify things, I'm more than happy to try and assist. Like I say, this is available for you to read in full. I don't want to go through this, directly word for word with you guys, especially like I say, a lot of it is summarized in the eligibility form, and that's why I wanted to start off simple, because a lot of that is hit here and kind of made a little bit more digestible. But in the procedure itself, you have more information that goes over a little bit more of the definitions of things and also references where you can pull things, like I say, some of the Florida screens and some of the other resources. Next thing I want to show you guys is the MIS form. The MIS3, you should be familiar with this form. This form we use to quickly note what we're using to eligibilize somebody for and what we're using to verify the different categories. When you're using this, and again, from a data entry and also a monitoring standpoint, please make sure you're filling this out in full. You're filling this out completely. Do not use pencil. If you're using a pen, make sure that it's a pen that will show, that's easy to see. It's not a pen that's very light. Make sure it's a pen that's either black or blue. And you only need to check off one of these. So if you're doing primary address and they give you a driver's license and an ID and a utility bill and a lease agreement, and if they give you everything on this list, just pick one for them. Because it realistically, it doesn't matter which one. We just need to verify their primary address and verify they're a Hillsborough County resident. I would say if they give you a license, because you can use that for several things, you can use that for this, you can use that for date of birth. I would say just go ahead and use a driver's license, but only check off one. If you make a mistake on really this form or any form, just make a single line cross through it, put your initials next to that, and then make a check next to the actual selection that you're wanting to go with. Don't scribble it out. Don't do a bunch of crosses, because that just makes it messy on the back end. It makes it harder to review. And depending on who the DEO monitor is, it's not a, it's not a, it's not listed on the monitoring tool. Like, did this person make a bunch of crosses on the form? It's not going to be a finding, but it's definitely going to be an observation and a note that they make, for us, and just the cleanliness of how we're processing the data and information. So you have these different categories here. These are just kind of very typical verifying categories that fall across all of WIOA. Again, general eligibility here at the top. Here in the second box, you have low income for AD and OSY. And so are you using food stamps? Are you using income and family size? And then are you doing that based on an applicant statement? So are they saying, I made $0 in the past 6 months? That is something that we can take. We usually prefer if they have pay stubs, and obviously if their income is zero, it's kind of hard to verify that. Although we can look and see in different systems like Work Number or Suntax, have they worked in the past 6 months? Have they actually had income? But we are able to take an applicant statement that is acceptable, or you're using annualized income, you're actually getting the pay stubs and doing that, the calculations and doing all of that. Are they homeless? Are they getting cash welfare? Are they individual of one with disability, individual with disability? Again, family of one, self-sufficiency definition, or are they a low poverty area? And then here you have the hard to serve barriers for the youth that you would check off. And then here, like I say, there is a full, more detailed list of the dislocated worker eligibility. Here's where that is. So like I say, I'm sure you guys have seen the MIS3 form. Here's where you would check off eligibility for their specific dislocated worker category. And so it is a lot of information on here that we try to make as compact and as user friendly, and it consume as at least as little pages as possible. But as you're going through this, again, just like the other categories, other selections, please make sure you're checking off one and make sure that it's easy to distinguish and see which one it is. So I do want to hit that and just kind of highlight that quickly. I wanted to mention this one. I know we kind of mentioned it already, but here's the LISL levels, the current LISL levels. And I apologize, actually, that needs to be changed. It's not 2021, it is 2022, but it was updated earlier this year. They update it and change it every year. And so the new LISL levels will come out, and we always publish that out to staff. The last thing I want to hit, unfortunately, it looks like I did unfortunately talk enough to take up the hour. But the last thing I'm going to hit for you guys is justification and suitability. And this is not going to take very long at all. It is very kind of straightforward in its purpose. There's not really a short form to describe it, and the procedure itself is only 5 pages. This really applies mostly to training. So if an individual is coming in for training services, there are a couple of things that we're wanting to look at for that individual. That is the purpose of WIOA Fund. That is the purpose to offer training assistance specifically to them. So are they unlikely or unable to obtain or retain employment, leading to economic self-sufficiency? Are they in need of training services to obtain or retain employment? Do they have the skills and qualifications to participate in training? Are they unable to obtain grant assistance from other sources to pay for training? So if they're eligible or they're getting Pell grants already, then we don't want to duplicate services and then use our training funds to pay for that person to then get additional training if they're already getting training from or funding from another source. And we want to make sure that they select a training program that directly links to employment opportunities in the local area. And so we don't want to give them training opportunities in this is an egregious example, but it's the one that kind of quickly comes to mind. We don't want to give somebody training for mountain climbing in Florida. We don't have mountains, so there's not really anything to climb. We want to make sure that it's something that's meaningful, that's gainful. That's kind of the purpose on our CSTB website. There's the targeted occupations list, and so I definitely hope you guys refer to that. That gets updated every year. But we usually try to go by that list because those are occupations that we know are in demand. We know those are occupations that somebody can go into training in, and then we can turn around and then help them and assist them get job placement. And so that's one difference between CareerSource and some other training services that are out there, is because we're a workforce board, we're directly equipped to not only help people get the training, but then turn around and help them get a job. A lot of times, if somebody goes to other training providers, they go through like HCC, or they go through Eckerd sometimes, or they go through Everest, or they go through some of these other training institutions. They'll help you get your training, but they're not going to help you get a job. And getting a job is the whole point. That's why you went through the training to get you did it for the skills, but now you want to apply the skills and use the skills. And so WIOA is two-pronged in that, of helping people get the skills and then turning around and trying to help people get jobs. And so factors in suitability and justification for training. Have they received federally funded training in the past? Do they presently hold relevant skills or credentials in the targeted occupation? What are their literacy levels and assessment? We don't want to put somebody in a very intensive program. We don't want to put them in like coding or legal assistant if they don't read well or they have comprehension skills. We want to look at something that's a little bit more fits better for them. We also want to look at something that they're going to sustain, and we don't want to get them something that they're going to be in for 3 months, 6 months, and not to, I advise never to be performance focused when assisting our customers. However, we are held to a performance standard. And so part of that performance standard is, did somebody retain employment after their training, in the quarters after their training? There is a justification for training services form. I'll say, like I said, I'm in more in the background, so I'm not in the nitty gritty of program management. So I don't know if your supervisors have you guys still using that form. Hopefully they do, because again, that form kind of helps you list out and look, is this person ready for training? Is training a good idea for them? There is a lifetime services cap. It's not included in here. I want to say that it is 10,000, and then it's 15,000 for apprenticeships, if I'm not mistaken. But I would have to double check on that. But there is a lifetime cap, and so that should be detailed. If nothing else, if you're ever confused, well, has this person reached the lifetime cap? Check the case notes in Employ Florida, because part of the case note requirements is we put people in training services as we help them, as we assist them. Part of that case note requirement is tracking how much funds are going out to that person. What have we paid out for? What are they at? So if they're at $9,000 and the cap is $10,000, and they're trying to go into a training that's $2,000, we're going to need to sit down and reevaluate that and look at that. Firstly, we're going to need to look at and say, oh, why have we paid for $9,000 worth of training for you, and now you're coming back to us for more training? Is it that there wasn't enough training for you offered? Was it that you just are trying to switch around? Unfortunately, that happens a lot. Of people are just, well, I want to do this. Now I want to do this. Now I want to do this. That's great. You're trying to kind of search and discover what it is you're trying to do. But these training funds, unfortunately, they are limited. And so we can't just pay for everybody to go out and look and try to be a chef and then try to be a DJ and try to do this and do that. We want to make sure that when they go into training, it's something, and again, in the justification and the suitability, are you interested in this? Do you see yourself dedicated to this? Do you see yourself having a career in this? And it's also the part for you guys as career counselors to discuss with them and say, okay, you're going as training as an RN or an LPN, or you're going into medical. Here are the different career fields that you can do. Here's the kind of day-to-day things that you'll be doing. Here's the growth opportunities that are available, that could be available for you. Is this something that you're interested in? And having those honest discussions with your customers and your applicants. Do they presently hold credentials or degrees in an occupation? This one I think is very important. So if they already have degrees, skills, or credentials in an occupation, putting them in a training program may not be the best fit. However, does that mean that we can't help them? No, absolutely not. There's a lot of different services under WIOA, and so that person should be referred to individualized career services for assistance with their resume and job search, and say, well, you already have the skills. You don't need training to get the skills you already have. So let's look at your resume. Maybe you're not getting jobs because your skills are not properly listed on your resume, not properly advertised. Maybe you're not, unfortunately, not having access to correct job opportunities. So let's get you an Employer Florida. Let's get you job search assistance. Let's get you to some of the job fairs, things like that. Additionally, and I really like this one myself, additionally, these customers are ideal candidates for referral to OJT opportunities. We can definitely look at OJT opportunities for those people because they already have the skills. And so while OJT is technically on-the-job training, they should be getting more skills. They're already coming in with skills, and so they're not having to, frankly, waste time going through a training program to get the skills. They already have it, and they're ready to start, which is a valuable asset to the employer. Literacy levels and assessment. So again, using the TABE. Now we're using TABE. Or no, I'm sorry. Now we're using Wonderlic. Previously, we were using TABE. Here we did add recently, so basic skills may not be necessary for individual holding a bachelor degree or higher, which obviously makes sense. Special exceptions may be requested to eliminate the basic skills assessment if a candidate is self-enrolled and has a GPA of 2.0 or has passed necessary enrollment exam results. And so I know there was a case actually that we were, the monitors were looking at where we were trying to determine, whether it was necessary for a person to take Wonderlic again, or if it could have been waived. And so these are at the moment the special exceptions. If you're needing anything additional, have that discussion with your supervisor, and try to see if there's a necessity for the skills assessment to be waived. Additionally, CDL doesn't require, so if you have somebody going into CDL, we don't need to do a skills assessment for that. And they're able to enroll with their CDL permit, the Department of Transportation physical and acceptance letter from the training site. And then sustainability, again, making sure that they are able to continue not only in the training, but in the field that they're going in. So make sure you're evaluating any financial barriers or hardships that prevent them from being successful. Like I said, we are held on the hook for performance. And so if you have somebody who starts training, but they don't finish because they drop out, that does hurt performance. But at the end of the day, we want to try and stop that ahead of time if able to. And if something does, I mean, obviously, I definitely understand things happen, family emergencies, medical emergencies. Um, Unfortunately, they may be incarcerated and be arrested. Different things happen, and so if those situations arise, just kind of addressing it with them and having a conversation and trying to, come up with some different options for them. See if they are able to delay the training, continue it, or different things that we can offer to them. Prerequisite program selection prerequisites and background. Excuse me, that was a mouthful. So looking at, if the program requires a GED or high school diploma, don't refer them to the training, refer them instead to a program where they can get their GED and high school diploma first, which is going to be very valuable because most jobs require a GED or high school diploma. So it's not like they're wasting their time. They're going to need that. It's definitely going to be valuable. Make sure that they get that first. Then let's go ahead and then get them into whatever training program they're looking for. Backgrounds. This is very important. I know we do background checks for people. Most of the time, people's backgrounds come clear. You have some people that have civil violations, traffic violations, things like that. But if you have somebody who's trying to be a registered nurse and they have a background of felony drug charges and physical abuse, I mean, just based on the state board, they're not going to be able to get a job, and a lot of times, let alone even start the training. And so make sure you're looking at the background and not referring somebody to a training or a program they won't even be able to start or participate in or get employment in based on their background. We do have a few different programs such as federal bonding. That's not directly through us, but we offer that can help people with backgrounds. But even then, it's not a guarantee that that person will get a job. It is up to the employer. But like I said, we do want to still be able to assist those people, but be realistic with them and look at opportunities that are going to be meaningful to them. So like it says here, if it may be necessary for a candidate to obtain a letter or offer of employment contingent upon their successful completion of training or certification. And so just because they have a background, that doesn't completely stop them. That's not a shutdown of the process. But again, we may want to look at some additional opportunities and resources for them. And so really that's the end of it. It's realistically a 4-page procedure, but you have TCOM 1916 as an additional resource. And that is justification of training, justification and suitability for WIOA training services, and realistically the end of my training itself. And so again, I'm just going to end this and reiterate that once I get this training wrapped up and finished, I'm going to work with marketing, excuse me, to get it posted here, get the link posted and everything. So I'd say it'll probably take a couple of days for them to get it posted because they have to download it and then convert it. And then they put it on like an unlisted YouTube playlist and make it available. But like I say, it will be available for you guys shortly. In the meantime, definitely reach out to me if you have any questions. My email was in the invitation that you guys got, barrw@careersourcetampabay.com. Reach out if you have any questions. At this moment, I expect to see you all tomorrow. I still have to put that invite together and a couple of the other training invites together. I'm looking to schedule it for the afternoon. I have a priority project I'm working on, and so I really want to get that wrapped up and pushed out. It'll probably be later in the afternoon. Um, I would hope that one won't be an hour like this one was, but speaking frankly, I can't promise that. And especially like I say, it can get very nitty-gritty in terms of speaking about LISL, the 70%, the family level 1 and 2 that get pulled from a different federal poverty level. But like I said, we'll go into that in depth tomorrow. So if you have any questions make sure you have those ready for me. And we can definitely go over those and address those tomorrow on low income. And then the plan for Salima wanted us to do the Employ Florida WIOA application on the 7th. And so that will be touching a little bit more on the eligibility, but specifically how that goes into Employ Florida and what some of that data entry looks like. And so if you guys aren't familiar with that, again, that we'll touch on that very much so in depth on Friday. The 7th is Friday. So I hope I've addressed all of your questions well. I hope you guys found this training meaningful. Again, if you come up with any questions afterwards, please shoot me an email. Don't hesitate. And if there's nothing else, I'll go ahead and end the recording and the training itself today. And I will see you guys tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Thank you for training.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Bye, Liz.
Bye.
Hi.